Alex, we're talking about voice today, and I'm so excited actually to be talking to you about this because I think you use your voice so well.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was reflecting that when I haven't used my voice well, it's usually been with people that have felt really safe to me because, just like with our kids, when they're trying out their new voices, they kind of got to try it out. Anyway, long story. I feel like you have experienced some of my bad moments of using my voice because it's within the context of a safe, healthy relationship. And we're going to talk about what it means to, blunder and make mistakes when you're using your voice, and especially if you feel like your voice is changing. But thank
Well,
you for
and
saying that, given that maybe not all of our moments have been 100% perfect, but we stumble through life together, moving in the same
well,
direction.
yeah, and I was just listening actually to a psychologist talk about that when you have those moments of whether it's, disagreement or conflict, it means you're safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the most part, I mean, obviously there are times, and we're going to talk about those today too, but
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, when you feel free to do that, it means you're in a safe relationship. And that's a beautiful thing.
Right.
And I do want to say this is we're wrapping up the voice series. This is our sister talk episode where it's you and I just kind of hashing out things that we don't feel like we fully covered or that we want to reiterate in this episode. But this is hard, that this topic of voice, especially right now, as we're hearing a lot of noise in culture, this is hard and there are no easy answers. And so some of the things we're going to talk about today, we fully recognize that it's not a simple yes or no, this is exactly what you do, because every context is different. Every relationship is unique. Every region of the country and the world is unique, and it's
Mm-hmm.
complicated. And that's just,
Mm-hmm.
I think I just want to lay that out before we start. It's complicated.
Yeah, it is. And I would like us to start by just talking about what it means to have a voice and what it is. When we're honing our voice, what are we honing? I think of you singing at my wedding 22 years ago. It was in your unique voice. If I closed my eyes today and listened to a recording, I would know that it was you.
Why does that make me cry? It's making me cry.
Because I think this is why. Because we use our voices in really tender places. We use them when it's important, and when they matter to us. And so if I were to sing at a wedding, people would not want to listen to me. But there would be a distinct difference in the sound of my voice, for sure, the quality. I am totally tone deaf. But God gives us each this unique sound, but it's not just what we hear audibly, it's the heartbeat behind it and how we articulate. So as a writer, I often talk about and think about voice. Obviously, it's not an audible sound unless you're listening to the book being read out loud, but it's how things are said, the manner, the words that are used, the formality. And so as we are considering what it means to have a voice and to hone it, it is meant to be a unique reflection of us. And as we go into these tender places where we talk about things that matter to us, where emotion can get involved, we can hear often, right, the emotion in somebody's voice, just now with me. And so I want us to be thinking about, this is meant to be a unique reflection of who I am in the world. And obviously, situations are going to determine what is said and how is said it. If somebody is grieving, I'm going to speak differently to them than if they're celebrating good news. And so I want us to understand the freedom that is in that too, that there isn't always a right way to say things. And as we talk specifically around hard conversations and using our voice in maybe difficult, tense, even surroundings, that there's no one right way except for the way that feels truest to us. And that can sound a little bit be true to yourself. But I do think that God gives us a unique voice for moments and places.
Interesting. I read this quote the other day that I wanted to read. I think sometimes we confuse having a voice with being heard. And I thought this was a really interesting quote. And it is by a man who founded a nonprofit called Speak Your Silence, which helps victims of sexual abuse. But he says this, the individual's own voices are the key to them being set free. They weren't reliant on others to hear them, to believe them, or to support them. Instead, they found freedom by way of discovering and using their own voices. So I thought that was really interesting. And what that tells me is that your voice doesn't have to be affirmed for it to be your voice. It doesn't have to be agreed with. It doesn't even have to be accepted. You finding your voice is an internal work that is separate from it being heard, if that makes sense. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at it because, granted, ideally, you would speak and someone else would hear and affirm whether they believe or not, right? That's the ideal, is that we can come to a table and we can have that kind of reciprocation. But that's not the definition of really finding your voice or using your voice. So maybe that's helpful as people think about that as we go on in the conversation.
Yeah, it's almost recognizing the dignity that God has already given you and using that to say the things that need to be said. And maybe that is in a way that nobody but God will hear in your prayers. To be authentic in your prayers, to be authentic in your journal as you're writing. And our goal as we move forward in the world is to be as integrated as possible and be authentic in our relationships with other people. And as we are discovering our voice, or maybe feel like our voice is changing as we get more information, more knowledge, or we have life experiences that change us, that we can authentically use our voice in a way that feels right and good and loves God and loves people well. And if that's
so I think that really gets to a point that I want to talk about, and you're already hitting on it, but with a voice comes responsibility, and we are stewarding our voices in way, just like we steward everything God has given us. We steward our talents. We steward, if you have a family, you steward your family, your spaces, your job. And we steward everything that we've been given. It's all from God's hand. So talk about just the responsibility that comes from finding your voice and using it.
Yeah. Right now, we live in a time where people are speaking out on lots of things. That's good. That's good if we all feel called to speak out on things. We also are feeling pressure, I think, to speak out on things. And we don't know, if I am silent on something, does that mean I'm in agreement with it? And we're having these internal conflicts. I'm hearing my older girls having these internal conflicts. If I don't say something, then does that mean that I'm in agreement? And so it's almost like we are rushed to speak out words before we have thought them through. And I am an internal processor, so I really like to choose my words before I say them. And I am married to like a hyper internal processor. He when he speaks, it's gold, but it takes him a while to say something. And so I want people to have that freedom to take time, and also to take off this mantle of, I'm just being honest. That can be used sometimes as an excuse to say things in a way that is unkind or unjust because we're saying it in the emotional moment. Now, I think emotions are appropriate and we can speak out of anger appropriately. However, I don't want us to join a movement of, I'm just being honest, And that means that I have the license to say whatever I want, however I want. And I've had that happen in family relationships before where people have said that. And it just has felt like, yeah, but that just feels like you're really not trying to honor everybody in the conversation. Now, sometimes we are being honest and we are trying to say it in a kind, gentle way. The fruit of the Spirit shouldn't be lost in our honesty in the way that we deliver.
It's so good. It's so true. And I was just reading Proverbs 12:18 with my boys the other day, and it says, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And I just think about that. I mean, there's such wisdom in that one statement that our words so often are reckless. And we just say them out of the moment, out of emotion, out of anger or whatever. But that it's like a sword, it can pierce and hurt, but that the tongue of the wise brings healing, even if you don't agree. If you're wise in the way that you say your words, it can still bring people into reconciliation and healing. And you can still be on different sides of a coin. So I love that contrast, that one is actually a wounding and one is a healing. And so to really think through, like, are the words I'm saying, are they reckless? Or do I need to take time so these can be words of healing that I offer?
Yeah. Because when I look back on the moments when I really regret what I've said or how I've said it, it has been in a spirit of recklessness where I haven't stopped to consider, how is this going to hang between me and the other person? And then you can see right away, when you say something and right away you think, ooh, I shouldn't have said that. That was too mean. I crossed a line. And it's been when I have been reckless and I have just spoken out of wanting to get in that zinger. And that's terrible. I mean, I'll just say it's terrible. I'm human. I do it. And I'm trying to do better. And I know that God is going to help me way more than I can help myself in this. So I am prayerfully asking him to help me, and also to help me when those things come out, to say quickly, I'm sorry that I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have said it that way. I think this is a better way to say it. And so there is definitely a responsibility, because words hang around for a long time, or they can. If we think about some of the wounds from way back in our own lives, often it's words.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. And I also think this whole idea of responsibility with our voice, we have to remember that as much as we want people to hear us, part of the responsibility piece is hearing others. And I really love, a couple of people in two different interviews said, how we can use the word and, not but. So when you say thank you, like Sasha Shilcutt said, say thank you for sharing. And then we say, and if we have something to add that's maybe different than what someone else has put on the table, but not but, like, okay, I'm going to thank you for this, but I'm now going to go into something that's going to totally discredit everything you just said. So twofold. Part of it is like actually hearing people, and then repeat back to them what you hear them say. What I hear you saying is this. And like being a good listener is, I think, a part of knowing our voice too, because we're secure enough in our own voice that we can accept another voice and hear, and truly hear. And then to thank people for sharing their voice. I just thought that was a beautiful way to affirm someone else in that responsibility piece. So thank them, and then go ahead and share something different, information that you may have. But to do it in such a way that honors people. I just love that word dignity, and you and I use it a lot because we truly, I think it's a core value for each of us. Even though I don't always do it well, I don't always do it right, but I truly have that core value of let's offer people dignity. Every person I come in contact with, how can I offer them dignity in who they are. And I think as we come to come into our voice more, it's especially important to recognize that piece of having a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what about, let's go into when our voices change. How do we give ourselves permission? Because I think that is that's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
As we come into further education, as we grow in our own lives and we have more life experience, as we grow spiritually, our voices change. So what do we do with that?
Yeah, I would say probably a lot of our listeners are like us in a stage of life where things are changing for us. And as we get new information, we start having new and different ideas. And Jen talked about this with our kids, that we need to give them permission to grow and change. We need to give ourselves permission to grow and change. And what that might mean is that our voice may sound different, or we may be covering different topics or familiar topics in a new way, in a different way. And that's part of our growth process. Other people may be surprised by that and may not respond in the way that we would hope or love for them to respond. And so if someone is not receiving the way that you're saying something, or the fact that you're saying something about a particular topic in a wonderful way, I would say acknowledge that you are growing and changing, so that you are acknowledging their surprise a little bit. If they feel taken aback, like, wow, you've never shown any interest in this topic, or you've never been upset about this before, why is this upsetting you today? To say, you know, I am growing in this area and it's something I'm thinking a lot about. And just to say that out loud takes the elephant out of the room a little bit. I mean, there's still maybe some disagreement and conflict, but at least you're acknowledging, I'm changing. And because of that, the dynamics in our relationship around this particular topic may change. And I can think of lots of examples with my kids in parenting where, yeah, I have new information, so I'm changing my mind. Or in my marriage, yeah, I'm feeling like maybe I put this on the back burner for a long time and now I want to bring it back to the front burner, and here it is, and it's sizzling hot. So whatever the relationship, that acknowledging, I think, the newness or the difference is helpful. And then we can also get a little bit emotional. I'll speak for myself here. If I feel like it's not being received well, or I can get pre-emotional in that I'm nervous it's not going to be received well. And so to check our emotions, again, I'm not afraid of emotions, and I think they can guide us in a really great way. But I think they can also be a barrier when we're trying to communicate difficult things in the moment. So if there is a way to express ourselves without the emotion, maybe it's writing something down. Again, maybe it's just you're writing it down for your own sake to kind of get your own words and thoughts in order. But maybe it's writing somebody a letter. Maybe that's the first step. I mean, a lot of people in recovery and in therapy, part of the process is you write a letter first before you have that hard conversation. There's a reason for that. It's to acknowledge that your voice is changing. But I think for me, and this is partly why I write books, I call it my therapy I get paid for, is that it's a way for me to work out what I think and why I think it. So if writing something out helps you hone your voice, then go for it.
It's a great point. And I think a lot of people are actually sometimes stuck. And what do I think about this? What is my opinion on this? There's so much information. There's a lot of competing perspectives and voices. What do I think about this? And one of the things that I've read a lot about is how the exercise of writing transfers your information to your left brain, and it kind of toggles, because writing is both creative and structural. So it kind of toggles back and forth. And so, I mean, it really does help. That's why I journal, because it really does help. Even the motion of writing is really good for kind of systematically your brain organizing information. And so it does help, because then you actually know what you do think and what is your approach to something. And that's helpful. So I just like that. I think that's a really practical tip. Even if you're not a writer, you can definitely be a writer, and just that helps your brain to process what's in there and to organize it in a way that you can then speak it. Because I think you're right. I think we often sabotage ourselves because we get emotional about things and then we try and talk about it, but we can't, but we really haven't even thought through it anyway. So we're just kind of shooting from emotion.
Right.
So it just helps.
Yes, right here. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
totally.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I do. I'll just say it. I do. And if any of the sisters want to join me in that camp, but I don't want to be in that camp. I want to know what I think with an open hand. I mean, I enter conversations with an open hand. I don't go in, at least I try not to go in with a fight in the making. I really try to go in trying to have a conversation, but it does help to know this is my voice and this is the tone I want to have when I'm talking about it. And, we did hear from a couple of our guests last few weeks about not apologizing. And so I don't need to apologize for what I believe or for considering things I've never considered before. I don't need to apologize for that.
Well, so let's talk about when we do need to apologize.
Yeah.
I would say that's maybe more where I find myself in that camp sometimes. I apologize to my kids all the time. I always have. But let's talk about that. Like when we do use our voice in such a way that it is not bringing life to people and it's a little bit too harsh or to this or to that, what do we do?
Mm-hmm. Well, like you said, I think apologizing, we say, what do we say in our house? Like fast and furious, quick and frequent. If you feel like you need to apologize, then you probably should and do it. Don't let a lot more time happen. And especially with little kids, I learned that, their attention span is so short. They're going to forget what you did, but they have to learn that when they are wronged, it is okay and expected that somebody will try to reconcile and apologize. So to do it quickly. And here's my pattern. I beat myself up when I say something that I regret. And so the more time that goes between when I said it and me reconciling with someone, the more the inner tapes are playing. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it paralyzes me from continuing to use my voice. So if I want to be using it out in the world, I need to recognize that I am going to say things in ways that aren't perfect. And perfectionists probably struggle with this more than non-perfectionists. But it is our enemy because we're not going to say everything perfectly, especially if we're talking about new topics or difficult topics. We're going to say things in an awkward way. We may say it in a way where somebody takes offense and we have to work through that. But if the other option is to not say anything at all, I would hate for that to be the end result because we are embarrassed or we're ashamed of our voice. Now, like I said, I'm all for being quiet to be thoughtful, but we shouldn't suppress our voice because we've made mishaps, because we're human and we need to give ourselves and other people permission. So I always want to extend as much grace to somebody else as I do to myself. It's just my tendency is I'm more willing to give grace to other people than I am to myself.
I think this brings up the point of humility as well. Mm-hmm. I think as we learn to exercise our voice, along with hearing others, humility is just a huge virtue that we can just constantly pray for. And I love C.S. Lewis when he says that humility is the virtue that makes all of the other virtues what they should be. And I think that's really true, that without humility, we struggle. And so humility is what allows us to apologize. It allows us to be introspective enough to say, I didn't do that well, or that was not great in the way that I approached that, and I need to make that right. So, that's just such a beautiful trait. And I will say 100% of the time, it brings people to a better place, to a more intimate place. I mean, we think about that. Pride actually is what separates us from people. Humility is what draws us close together. And so the more we can come to the table with humility as we are practicing with our voices, the better, right? And so and not just saying, you know, my way, my perspective, my opinion is the way, but rather I can have my opinion, but I can also be humble enough to acknowledge that this is mine and it's not yours. And I can honor you in what you have to say about this. It's just such a different heart when we come to the table with people.
Yeah. And then if conflict does come up, we can deal with it in a way that is healthy. And that is one reason I think a lot of women don't use their voices. And our guests all talked about, you know, it can be uncomfortable, but we are afraid of conflict. And I want to tear that apart a little bit and say, disagreeing about something doesn't equate conflict. Now, you can have conflict about something, but in a culture that teaches women especially to be agreeable, we need to practice the muscle of disagreeing and not making it personal, which men in general
Gosh, that's hard.
Are so much better at doing, at saying, this is just my opinion on this. This doesn't have anything to do with our relationship. You're still a fun person to be with. And yet we see a disagreement on something as conflict, and then we tiptoe around it, and then we never use our voice, and we don't let other women use their voices to the full potential to hear that beautiful sound that is uniquely theirs and to express ours, because we are afraid that it's going to be personal. And so how can we practice with each other the art of disagreeing without conflict?
Okay,
Do you have any insights?
I'm going to give you a scenario. Okay. And I'm going to see how you would handle it. And so this is a real life scenario that someone had who was telling me about it the other day. So they're out at dinner as couples and a subject comes up, and one of the couples is talking about their perspective on this subject, and they're very pro this subject. Well, the other couple starts feeling very uncomfortable because they have the exact opposite viewpoint. And so there's this inner turmoil going on, right, in this other person. Do I say something? Do I just let this other couple talk and just say, we're here to have a nice dinner, and I'm just going to let this go because I just want this to be dinner? Or does this person speak up? And if so, how? How do you speak up when someone is sitting across the dinner table, only 4 of you? They're sitting across the dinner table with the complete opposite viewpoint, and you find yourself getting, you know, how you like your heat starts to rise in your body, and you just start having this like inner turmoil in your brain of what do I do? What do I do? So let's tackle like that kind of real life scenario that may not happen exactly that way, but happens in a similar way a lot.
Yeah. I would guess that the intimacy of the relationship is going to determine a little bit the comfort and the responsibility to speak up. Because the closer we are with someone, I think the more we need to hold each other accountable to ideas. And so someone that I barely know, I don't think I have the relational clout to convince them of something. And I don't know that I want to spend my time doing that. But it can still be very uncomfortable. So if you're not at a point where you feel like, I'm not going to address this head on because this could just derail the conversation in the evening, but I can't just not say anything. You know, I think a lot of us find ourselves in that position. I sometimes turn to the I wonder statements.
Yes, you do.
I wonder what someone in this position would think about that. Or I sometimes wonder what my neighbors who live this way or have these circumstances experience that. And so it's not attacking. Now, some people may not agree with me. They may say, when you see something, hear something wrong, you need to call it out. I also wonder if that is part of the dynamic that's happening in our culture right now, is we feel this moral obligation to call each other out instead of gently wondering together and leaving room for the Holy Spirit to do its work. And I was in a conversation last week, a group conversation about how to handle extended family conversations around race specifically. And how do we call out people in that? And one woman said, I'm just not sure I want to fight with my dad about this. And I thought, that's a legit concern that a lot of women have. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is my responsibility? And will this person be in a position to hear my opinion? And I encouraged her to live with the most integrity she possibly could on this particular issue. And the way that she lives is going to speak volumes to both her own dad and to her children. And that way of living forward is using your voice without conflict. Now, again, a lot of people may disagree with me on that approach and say that you need to call things out very directly with every person in your life that sees things differently than you do. I just question how effective that is.
I would agree. I think about my oldest son. He is so gentle. Mm-hmm. And there's something so disarming about it that you can literally have any conversation with him. And I have seen him have conversations with people who believe polar opposite of him on his track team, on his cross country team, at school, in classes, and have full on conversations that I could never have, because he is gentle. He's thoughtful. He's thought through what he thinks about it, and he is measured, and he's smart. So that helps, because he's able to put things together well. But I'm telling you, it's the gentle. I want to circle the word gentle in all of that, because they don't feel threatened by him. And so he can ask challenging questions without them feeling like he's attacking them. Mm-hmm. And there is something in that. There is like a secret code in that unlocks this idea of being able to have conversations. Because as soon as someone feels attacked and they feel threatened, then you go on the defense, right? We all do. As soon as we feel like there's some I'm being attacked, we automatically, our guards go up and we start to protect, because then we start to go, I'm going to get hurt. But they feel safe with him and they're able to have that conversation. I feel like he's such an inspiration to me in how I want to be able to have conversations with others. And I do think there's just a little bit of a secret weapon there.
Yeah. Well, it gets back to the fruit of the Spirit. Mm-hmm. If the fruit of the Spirit is present, the conversation's going to be more effective. And so he demonstrates that, and people feel it, and they can't probably articulate that that's what they're feeling.
No, not
right.
At all.
Most of us don't walk around being like, wow, you're really demonstrating the fruits of the Spirit right now. Right. But when we can step back and say that's what's happening, it makes total sense. Mm-hmm. How would you handle the restaurant conversation, sitting across the dinner table and feeling uncomfortable in that moment and wondering, do I say something or do I not?
Mm-hmm. I've been thinking a lot about it, because I feel like if I were to go on my gut, I would say something and get emotional and probably get upset. And I always have to weigh, Peacemakers International is this organization that I love. I've talked to you about it a lot, but it really helps discern whether you should speak up or, as Proverbs talks about, overlook an offense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a real art to this whole, because I think we often feel like we have to speak up about everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. Don't you get tired sometimes when you're around people where everything becomes an issue? It's like, oh, now that's an issue. Now that's, where everything becomes an issue. And it is exhausting. And so I think there's so much wisdom in this idea of, Proverbs says it is to a person's honor to overlook an offense. It's actually to your honor to overlook it. But then the question then becomes, so when do you not overlook it? When is it too much to overlook? And I think one of the things they benchmark in that is this damaging the relationship? If I don't speak up, is this going to damage the relationship? And so that is a question I often ask myself in those moments. If I don't speak up, will this relationship be damaged? Or if I overlook this, is it going to bring us closer together because I'm able to just love this person, not agree with this person? And that's the hard part, right? Is that we often hear this whole idea that if you are silent, then you are advocating for their position.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you stay silent, that means you are, whether intentionally or not, you are saying that this is okay. And you're affirming that. But I think when it's tricky when you're in relationships with people, real people who are sitting in front of you that have a totally different viewpoint. And I think asking yourself, is this going to build up or tear down this relationship, is a really wise question. And you have to ask yourself in that moment, do I speak up? So I guess my answer is, I'm not in that relationship, so I don't totally know the answer to that question. But I think I would ask myself, should I speak? Is this going to damage the relationship? And if the answer is yes, then how can I say something in a way that doesn't create an absolute firestorm? Because, that's the other verse that we can point to on this, James 3:5. In the same way, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire, right? So we can make great speeches with our tongue, or we can absolutely set a forest on fire by our tongue. It's a powerful, powerful thing that we hold. And so how can I do it in a way that actually is going to bring us together instead of setting a forest fire to this relationship? And it's really hard. And I can't say I'm great at this because I get emotional and then I speak out and then I don't always say it the way I want to. So it's hard.
Yeah. And I'll add, as you were talking, I was thinking, sometimes we think we need to say something right now because the person is saying something right now. And for those of you who are listening who think, well, maybe the relationship is worth being damaged because this topic is too important to me, that there may be a way to effectively use your voice that is more in the long haul than right now. So maybe this isn't the moment. So even if you choose not to say something at that dinner, at that particular moment, doesn't mean you're not going to bring it up again, or doesn't mean you're not going to address it, because that person may not have their guard up in the same way if they feel heard because you sat and listened at that dinner. Now, again, not everybody's going to agree with me, but I just think we have to look at it from lots of different perspectives of there could be a way to truly be heard that you can only accomplish if you are using your voice in the long haul in the relationship. And we know that with our kids, right? We parent for the long haul. We sometimes say things in the moment that we think that did not help the long haul, right? That just set me back. I have had moments where I thought that just set me back a year with this child.
Totally.
But had I practiced a little bit of self-control, I could have 2 days later approached the same topic, and life and death wasn't going to happen in those 2 days, in that 2-day gap. So anyway,
I love that so much. And I know of someone who actually sent a message to some people and just said, I love you and I want to preserve our relationship. And for that reason, we can't talk about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's a great way to do it, because outside of the moment, you're not in the moment talking about that topic, but you just say, I understand that we're probably not going to come to agreement on this, and I really treasure you. And for that reason, can we just not talk about this topic together? And so then it becomes off limits. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay, because you're still holding on to your viewpoint, right? You're not giving up your viewpoint. You're actually saying, I actually have the opposite viewpoint, and I just don't think we're going to come to any agreement on this. I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change mine. So let's just table this one topic when we're together. Mm-hmm. That's okay.
Mm-hmm. And people may be listening and wondering, how does that fit with me honing my voice? And our voices aren't spoken into a void. Our voices are spoken into the real world with real relationships, with real quirky people who match our quirks in all the wonkiest ways. And so we have to acknowledge that this isn't a perfect system. The world is a broken place, and we're broken people dealing with other broken people. So sometimes when we're using our voice, the best and healthiest thing is to not use it. And again, I'm going to probably get some hate mail for that, but I just think self-control, there's a reason why there's all these proverbs about it and about the dangers of our tongue, because there is a time to speak and there is a time to be quiet.
Totally. And I will just say that actually you are using your voice by saying, I'm putting a boundary here. Mm-hmm. Because basically, if you were just acquiescing and going along time after time after time, you may feel like you have no voice in it. But you actually putting up a boundary and saying, I just can't go there on this with you, you're protecting the relationship, you're putting up a boundary, and you're really using your voice to do that. You're allowing other people to know your voice in that. Mm-hmm. So, and again, our voice, I think it's a good point, going back to the beginning, our voice is not determined by whether someone else can hear it or not. Mm-hmm. So it's not determined on whether that other person can hear what we have to say. They know where we are. Most of the time people do. But Alex, I do want to talk about what happens if we're in a whole system that we feel like is ignoring our voice or point of view. Like in that case, right, you're in a foursome at a dinner table. They know probably what your perspective is on some different things. And if not, you're probably going to make it known at some point because you're close mm-hmm. enough for that. But what if you're in a whole region of the country or of the world, or you're in a space where you feel like, I cannot say my voice in anything, or I'm just slammed down, or I just feel like the majority of people are speaking in ways that I don't agree with. What do you do then?
Mm-hmm. It's really hard. It's really hard. I'm just going to start with that. I do go back to the I wonders and the questions, and getting a conversation going about why people feel the way they do or believe the way they do. Once that conversation is going, it is more natural for us to do what some of our guests suggested in saying, well, I have a different perspective on that, or I have something to add to that. But if the conversation isn't there, not just on what we believe, but why we believe what we believe, then it just feels like I'm attacking. I'm going against a wall. So I would say anything that can massage the conversation to keep it moving and going is good. Because then too, the more detailed you can get about, well, why do you think about, oh, because you had this experience, then you can experience empathy with them. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry you experienced that. but you also are getting into details where maybe you actually have common ground. And then when you can find places of common ground, then you can at least cling to those in your relationship and maybe start to talk some concentric circles around that, and then realize you're bumping up against places where you do disagree. But finding places of common ground really helps you speak your voice and have it be a starting place, and then you can move out from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think always, I mean, I will always fall on the side of relationship, that relationship is the way forward, always, because I do feel so strongly I believe that in my core. I think as people are struggling with whole systems, like I've just had some conversations recently with people where they feel like their whole state, even in their, legislative decisions, are moving in a direction they can't support, whether that, is sex ed and the way they're approaching that in public schools to, who knows, just all the things,
Anything.
right? All the things. And that is difficult. And so I think I want to bring up a few things. One is you're not powerless. So write the letters, find out who you need to write to, talk to the school board if you need to, write letters to the school board. Go ahead and advocate in the way that you feel called to advocate. And that is where I just really want to talk about this idea of prayer as we find our voice. And prayer with other people. I mean, that's a part, I want to say, a core part of using our voices is prayer. Let's use our voices actually to lift our words high to God and to ask Him to help us discern where on this earth are we to speak into, and maybe what's ours to do and what isn't ours to do. One of the things I always love that you say is, what is only mine to do? And I think that's an important question in this conversation as well. What is mine to do? Where am I to speak and where am I not to speak? And we've already talked about that a little bit, but how is prayer entering into that? So prayerfully consider, like really commit to praying over discernment and wisdom as to where you are to speak. And then if you really feel called in your state or your region, whatever it is, to advocate for a specific area, do it and find the appropriate channels to do that. You can make your voice heard through different avenues. It doesn't have to be speaking. It can be writing. It can be writing letters. It can be writing emails. It can be signing a petition. It can be joining a prayer group around, these different issues. So a voice, yes, it is an actual voice, but sometimes it's other arenas as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, anything else to add on that one?
There is something about having the moral courage to be the lone person in the room. And that's why our prayer life is so important, because we have to discern, is this a time for me to stand up and say something instead of just knee-jerk standing up, saying it because it's your reaction? Or am I truly the person right now in this moment to say these words? And I was recently in a group conversation where I was feeling really uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. And I'd had some different life experiences, it seemed, from the rest of the people in the room. And I just felt like I need to say something. And the way I entered it was, can I make a comment? That was how I entered the conversation. And I made an observation from other situations I had seen and what had worked well. And I tried to kind of have a positive spin on it and say, I've really seen it work well this way, which was a different direction. Now, I don't know that it made a huge impact on the group, but I knew that I needed to say something and not just let it go. Was it awkward? A little bit. Did it make me a little bit uncomfortable? Kind of. Is it going to impact the relationships that I have with the people in that room? Maybe. But I still feel really good about it because I felt, it wasn't God's audible voice, but I felt like there was enough conviction in my heart that I could trust the Holy Spirit was prompting me to say something in that moment. And then there's the whole online space. And boy, that's a whole nother animal as far as using our voices. But we need to be careful there because it is so much easier to fire away those little spears when there is not a person sitting on the other side of the table from us, even though there are people sitting on the other side of the screens. We don't feel it in the same way. And so we say things that maybe we regret, or in a way that we regret or should regret at least. And so I just want to acknowledge that that is a part of the way that we're using our voices in the world right now. And especially right now when we're a little more isolated from real people. Board meetings are happening online and through emails. Meetings that would normally be happening. PTA meetings are happening in virtual spaces. And so as people are making decisions and using their voices and speaking up, we have to figure out how to do it in a way that is God honoring and people honoring.
Yeah. And I've just rarely seen someone change their entire worldview on a Facebook fight. You know what I'm saying? On a Facebook argument. I just have never seen it. And so is that, I think it begs the question, is that really the best place to be having that conversation?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just don't know that is the best place to be having that conversation. It's too removed, it's too impersonal, and it's really just people trying to get the other person to see things from their perspective. And I just really feel like true, thoughtful life change happens through loving relationships and seeing people live things out in the day-to-day. And I just haven't seen it on Facebook. So, side note. Okay. Well, Alex, this has been a really good conversation. Like we said at the beginning, this is not easy. This is hard. And so Alex and I, we are firmly rooted in that knowledge that this is our approach. And it's where we've landed, where we have prayerfully landed in these things. We understand there's different ways to go about things, and that some people are called to do things differently, and that's okay too. But we hope that at least gives you some food for thought, some wisdom for the journey, and just a way to look at things differently.
Yeah. Yeah, it is not easy. And yet, God did place us each here on this earth at this point in history, in the families we're in the workplaces we're in. And he wants the world to hear our voice, because if we are speaking words of truth that are God honoring and people honoring, the world will be better for it. And the world needs hope. And so we often say at the Sisterhood that we are hope bearers.
Yeah.
We want to bring hope into the places where we are. And that means using our voices to do that. Yeah. So whether it's on your couch with your kids, or at the front of a room full of people, or on a podcast, we want to encourage you to use your voice that God has given you in the places where he's put you.
Yeah. Amen to that. All right, hope bearers. Well, have a great, great day. Go hone your voices in the way that you feel called to today, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.